Now, whether you view Tuesday's election results as the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, we at City Club are now looking forward to an exciting range of new and important Friday Forum programs in the upcoming weeks. For example, next Friday on November 14th, we will tackle the statistics and realities of this country's diabetes epidemic with an expert panel from OHSU's Harold Schnitzer Diabetes Health Center. Very important topic. And 1 week later, on November 21st, in conjunction with Speaker Mark Holloway of Social Venture Partners, we will honor some of Portland's young civic leaders with the Skidmore Awards. Now, this was one of the most meaningful and hopeful and encouraging programs we had all of last year, and we're delighted to repeat it again this year because of the faith that it inspires in the youth of our culture that these award winners that you'll see and hear from next week. I strongly encourage all of you who can attend or who can listen and watch to do so 2 weeks from today. Now we have a brief but extremely important announcement from City Club President-elect Sue Thomas. Sue.
Thanks, Jim. Good afternoon. We can't take for granted the things that we love. And one of the things that I love is my engagement with the City Club of Portland. Now, I know that this is a pretty nerve-wracking time in terms of economics for all of us. But City Club has been here for 92 years. It was started during the First World War. It survived the Great Depression, the Second World War, the turbulent 60s, and lots of other things in between. And I think it would be easy for us to assume that City Club is always going to be here. But that's only going to be the case if those of us who love it continue to invest in it. So I am hoping that we will not let this moment of financial uncertainty be the thing that causes us to stumble in the future of this great organization that we all love so much. So I'm hoping that you will join me this year, once again, for those of you who have done so in the past, we thank you, in continuing to give generously to City Club. Every single gift makes a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. And as an example of what happens when you have a vibrant City Club in this community, and right before we turn to our program, I want to acknowledge that this program today is the last of the club's Making Sense of the Election series that we've held this fall. And I want to acknowledge the tremendous work done by your committees and our professional staff, all of our organizations, volunteers to make these events happen. This Making Sense of the Election focused consisted of 8 Friday Forum debates. We hosted 3 election-related programs through Agora and New Leaders Councils, our other organizations within City Club's umbrella. And the voters agreed with City Club 6 for 6. We scored 100% with the voters on our state ballot measure recommendations through our 4 ballot measure studies and 2 resolutions produced by our research board and our study committees. Now, this all constituted, in my view, an amazing and valuable contribution to our membership and to our community, and we need to celebrate what the club has achieved this fall. As you all know, folks, this kind of thing doesn't happen without ideas and doesn't happen without commitment and doesn't happen without effort on the part of a lot of people. So at this time, I'd like to have everybody that participated in this Making Sense of the Election effort, whether you're on the board, whether you're on one of the committees, volunteers, and our staff, to all stand and be recognized. Stand up. Thank you. And now to our program. Across virtually the entire political landscape, not only of this country, but seemingly throughout the world, last Tuesday night's election of Barack Obama as President of the United States was an event of truly historic proportions. Most of us have never seen anything like it, and probably won't again in our lifetimes. But what is the real significance, the on-the-ground significance of that outcome for our country and for Oregon? Also, what do we make of the election of Democrat Jeff Merkley and the defeat of Republican Gordon Smith as Oregon's new U.S. Senator? And of course, I won't mention the fact that one of them showed up at City Club and one of them didn't. But what's the significance of that election? And what do we need to understand about the Democratic Party's sweep of our state's constitutional officer elections, the substantial increase in the Democratic majorities in the Oregon House of Representatives and Senate, and the voters' virtual clean sweep rejection of the Bill Sizemore and Kevin Mannix ballot measures. What do we make of all this? Well, today we welcome an expert panel to discuss all of these questions and the future of the political landscape both nationally and here in our beloved state. Our panel's moderator will introduce the remainder of the panel, but let me now introduce the moderator. As mentioned earlier, our moderator is the senior political reporter for the Oregonian newspaper. He is also the author of Mapes on Politics, a blog that he does for the Oregonian. This spring, we can look forward to his coming book, Pedaling Revolution, How Cyclists Are Changing American Cities, only in Portland. He holds a BA in journalism from San Jose State University in California. Please give a warm City Club welcome to the Oregonians, Jeff Mapes.
Thank you so much. I mean, wasn't this a great thing? America's reality show. You know, I have never seen, I don't think, people so engaged by this last election in so many different ways. I have an aunt who's in her 80s, kind of getting to be more of a shut-in, and this is a woman I don't even think who voted in past years most of her life. And, you know, I was talking on the phone the other day, and she talked how she listens to NPR in the morning and then switches to CNN and says that Fareed Zakaria, oh boy, what a brilliant guy. And can you get me this book on tape of Tom Friedman, you know, his new book? And I mean, it's just amazing how people are getting involved in this in a different way. And so I'm really looking forward to this, this forum here. We have three very sharp people I've known for several years, and you know, I depend on them for so many insights. And you know, in journalism, they say that you quote the smart remarks that people make, and you steal the brilliant ones. And I've been doing it from these three for many, many years. So I got my notebook. In fact, I'm going to do it again at some point as they're talking. So I'm just going to, without further ado, go into brief introductions. Mark Weiner is a, let's see now, they don't have his title right currently. He's a man about town, but at any rate, he is a consultant now, but it's Winning Mark. Yeah, because we got to get your plug in for your name. What the important thing is that Mark has a wonderful pedigree in politics. We were talking the other day about Charles Schumer, who's the new king of Capitol Hill, having helped elect all these Democrats to the Senate. True story that Schumer, when he was a young member of Congress, ran through something like 5 schedulers in 6 months. Mark was the 6th, and in one form or another, he lasted for 5 years, so you know he's a tough guy. He's done quite a bit of work for the Democratic caucus in Salem. Little known fact, he was also at one time Kevin Mannix's first legislative aide. I'm not going to let him get away with anything. This was when Kevin was a Democrat, so it was okay. Thanks, Jeff. I guess I'm not going to get invited back, huh? And next in line is Dan Lavey, who I also got to know when he was a young legislative aide down in Salem. The 1995 session, he was the chief of staff to this, you know, kind of bright, wealthy, interesting guy who had sort of come out of nowhere named Gordon Smith to become Senate President in his first term, if I'm remembering right, as in the first and only term in the state Senate. And 1995, the Republicans had gained full control of the legislature for the first time since I think maybe 1971, something like that. And Dan, very gregarious even then, had a steady stream of reporters kind of hanging outside his office, and we would go in to get briefed about this exotic species, Republican legislative leadership in Oregon. And so it was always fun. Since then, he went on to work for U.S. Senator Gordon Smith, and now is a senior partner in the Gallatin Group, which is a fast-growing firm that seems to have its tentacles ever expanding all across the country. And if you're somebody who was once in high political office and now are not, come talk to Danny. He may have a job for you. And lastly, but not at all leastly, is Tim Hibbitts, who is also one of the very first people I talked to when I arrived in Oregon in 1984, because even then, I mean, he was about 15 at the time, but even then, he had a good 10 years of experience in Oregon politics, and I mean, he just knew everything about the state, so I would just sort of sit there and try to download him as much as he can, and we were fortunate after a few years at the Oregonian to be able to grab him as our pollster and work together for many years. And unfortunately, newspaper business being what it is, and his star going through the stratosphere and very aggressive bidding from Fox TV, he's no longer with the Oregonian, but doing well in that medium. And you know, I miss your crosstabs and all those great photo names and phone numbers that we've depended on for so many years, but not as much as I miss working with you. So we're going to, and we'll just go right in that order if that's okay with you that I introduced you in, and we're going to get these three gentlemen to talk about the meaning of the last election, where we're going in Oregon. I'll throw out one thing. Who would ever think that a larger percentage of Idaho's congressional delegation is Democratic than Oregon's delegation? That's kind of a trick thing because there's only one Democrat in each, but we have more than they do. So my wife's a math teacher, so I like to do that kind of stuff. At any rate, so we can talk about, are we going to become the mirror image of Idaho? Things can change around. Feel free to talk about where you think we're headed nationally or in Oregon. Mark.
Okay. So I just wanted to be clear. At one time, I worked for Kevin Mannix when he's a Democrat, but Hibbitts now works for Fox. So just want to get that out there. Actually, I don't have much in the way of introductory. I mean, the Q&A is always the most interesting part, but I do want to at least pause and reflect on really the breathtaking experience that election night was. I think that was sort of reflected, not just in the fact that, my team won, but while I certainly was not supporting for president, I have to acknowledge John McCain's extraordinarily gracious concession speech where he talked about, the meaning of this election. I think Senator Smith did the same thing. For me, watching Obama's speech on election night was great, but what was really amazing to me was when they would shoot the crowd. And I think the crowd there was reflective of the feelings of a lot of people who cross a lot of traditional boundaries. And I think it's just good for us all to pause and look at what has happened. The election of an African American and somebody who's clearly a new generational leader at a time of great national peril. And it's one of those moments that I think we'll remember for a long time, where we were and what we were thinking at the time. And I think that's we're going to get into the ins and outs and sort of what's underneath the numbers and, our catty little comments. Or at least I intend to be very catty. That's the great thing about victory. But it was a great night for America, and I think it was a great night for America, even if Obama wasn't your candidate. And I hope that the way he ran his campaign and the way a lot of people reacted will be emblematic of how we're going to go into this next year and this next 4 years. We got a lot of big problems here, and I think he does have the opportunity to continue to cross boundaries and help get us on a better path as a nation. So overall, I'm sort of a cranky Democrat. I hate everybody, but I'm much more on the progressive side. So I'm pretty happy with the result. And I think, at the risk of not pounding the table, but just restating the obvious, I think this election was emblematic of a couple of things. And first of all, I think it offers the opportunity to have a political discussion that's reality-based. And that may sound, obvious, but over the last, and I won't even say the 8 years, I'm not going to pin this all to Bush. I think the politics in this country over a lot of time is mostly centered on a lot of cynical manipulation of tribalism, get to God's guns gaze, and we can add immigrants to that, and maybe we can distract people from bigger issues because, frankly, people are making a pile of money, and we don't really want to interrupt that now, do we? It's sort of a willingness to deny reality, this idea that we will cut taxes, and we will cut taxes for the wealthiest people in this country, but everything will be fine. Oh, money will grow on trees, everything will be terrific, and then, concentrate on, these sort of divisive issues. They will get you mad, and you can ignore the rest. Now, I think that's a philosophy that's rooted in, cynicism and greed, and it has expressed itself in our politics, and it has expressed itself in our financial markets. And this is the year where a lot of those chickens came home to roost. And I think that had a big impact on the result in the election. There comes a point where you just can't deny reality anymore. And we look at the financial crash, and notwithstanding that the surge has brought some stability, that overall that the adventure in Iraq was just a fiasco on every level. At a certain point, Americans had their attention placed on the issues that are really going to matter for the future, and I think this election is emblematic of that. There's an old joke about a guy who goes to the county fair and he sees this cow who can do tricks. He can roll over, he can fetch, he can get your slippers. And there's a farmer at the county fair, or at the state fair, that says, they had this cow, and people keep coming up to him and say, how can you get a cow to do this? And he says, well, I've gotten that question a lot, and we'll come back on the last day. I'm going to answer it. I'll show everyone how you can train a cow to do pretty much anything. And so there's a lot of people on the last day of the fair, and the farmer says, okay, I'm going to teach you how to train a cow to do pretty much anything. And he takes up a 2x4 and bam, hits the cow right between the eyes. And he says, first, get the cow's attention. In a lot of ways, for a lot of reasons that we'd rather weren't true, this election was really, I think, getting Americans' attention. And it's my hope that this is not a transitory moment. It's a transitory moment. We're in a lot of trouble. Okay, we better do something different. But it begins a national conversation that's rooted in the kinds of things that we really need to do. It's not just a question of taxes. Are you going to raise my taxes? It's what do we need, and what does it cost to buy what we need, and how are we going to pay for it? Now, that sounds like it's the same sort of argument, and I'm just pushing that in a microcosm. But that, maybe we can have that conversation now. Healthcare. For many years, on healthcare, what people have been saying is, we have the best healthcare system in the world. And these, quasi-socialists will just destroy it, and it would be like getting your health care from the DMV. Well, first of all, the last time, I see Jane Cease looking at me. DMV is pretty good. Last time I got a driver's license, it worked pretty well. And we pay more and get worse outcomes than anywhere in the world. Well, maybe now we can have a conversation about that, because people are freaked out and say maybe we need to do something different. So my hope is that we're at the beginning of something that is a more reality-based, intelligent discussion of what we're going to do in this country and how we're going to come together as a country and accomplish what needs to be accomplished, as opposed to just trying to distract people and use misdirection to just keep the same old thing happening. If things get better, maybe people will revert to their own old habits. Time will tell. But to me, that's the takeaway from this election in a macro sense. We're in a tough time, and we have the opportunity to respond to these tough times as a country who is going to go forward and make it a better place for everybody. And for me, looking across the faces of the people in Grant Park on election night and the faces of people who I was with on election night, I think that what you saw in their faces was reflective of that hope. And I hope that the next years will show that that's true.
Okay, thanks. Dan?
As I listen to Mark, I only have come to mind, you're just not going to have the Republicans to kick around anymore.
It's okay, we have Lieberman.
That's right. Start acting like Republicans. The first thing, I'd make a disclaimer and say that on the, Senator Smith is my longtime friend, worked for him for a long time, so nothing I'm going to say today about him will be objective. I want everybody to know that at the very beginning. Although I would say that sometimes a misnomer about that people mistake things that Mark does or people like we do in our profession is that we're cheerleaders for our candidates. We are. We're also there to give them straight talk and sober analysis and good advice. But I think perhaps the Democratic Party may be better off for Senator Smith's defeat, but I'm not necessarily sure Oregon is. I would agree that on the issue of Senator Obama's election, I think there was a yearning in this country to elect him. I think it's historic and important achievement for our country to have crossed a very important barrier. That far exceeds the partisan change, but I think that's a very important thing. And I know I was one that bought the New York Times edition, 2 or 3 of them, and put them away in a box for my kids to have one day, and I did the same thing even with the Oregonian, Jeff. I have a few thoughts. Our firm published a little day after newsletter of analysis, and the Oregonian was nice enough to reprint it in their editorial page, or at least a portion of it. But I think, and hold your applause, City Club, I think the Republican Party in Oregon is dead. I say that because, and the reasons for it, you can get into tactical things about voter registration, things like that. But I think the national tide and the national identity of the Republican Party over the last 25 years, as it has moved south and it has moved from Grange halls into church pews, has hurt and not been kind to Republicans in places like Oregon or New Hampshire. And, economic differences are far easier to reconcile than cultural differences. And for those of us in the public opinion business and other things, I think our politics is becoming much more driven by culture than economics. And you can see that in vote behavior and other things as an indicator. Democrats used to be the workers and the Republicans were the owners. Now you can look at church attendance and economics and see something exactly the reverse, that lower income folks are tending to vote more Republican or less Democrat, another way to look at it. And church attendance is a really good indicator of vote behavior. So our politics is changing in really fundamental ways over the last 25 years, and it hasn't been kind to Republicans in the Northeast and Northwest. So the first thing is you have to understand it's a national environment that every party lives within. You are a division of a much larger corporation. And so that's the first thing that's changed. If you look back to maybe the governor's race here in 1986 between Goldschmidt and Paulus, this wasn't a huge ideological division between the two candidates. They were in many ways very similar. It was more of a fight over leadership style, maybe some priorities, but it wasn't a fight over an ideological struggle at all. And so that's the first thing I'd say. It's a national environment that's hurt the Republican Party here. The other thing is I'd say that the incessant effort by Mr. Sizemore and others to put these measures on the ballot that aren't well thought out, they don't even run campaigns on their behalf, has succeeded in probably only one thing, and that's permanently organizing the opposition. And one thing I've observed is that, so congratulations. One thing I've observed over the last decade is that Democrats in this state, supported by their financial allies, have done a really good job of using each successive election to organize themselves permanently in a very effective way. And that benefits candidates up and down the ballots. They've created infrastructure like the bus project and forums and other things that are very, very important and very, very valuable. The Republican Party isn't doing any of that. There's just, and that's leadership, that's organization, it's enthusiasm, it's idealism, it's also money from trial lawyers, money from labor unions. I mean, let's be honest about it. It's not, no money is dirtier or cleaner in my book than any other in politics. It's all money. But they've done a very good job of that. And so what that means is when there's a big tide, they can benefit more. And when the tide goes the other way, it's sort of like having shutters on a house in a hurricane. They either fly off or they defend the house. And in this case, the Republicans just have no shutters on the house. And I also think the Democrats in this state have done a far better job of recruiting candidates and getting younger people to commit to public service. There's a lot of really high-quality people I see serving in the legislature on the Democrat side. There's a few on the Republican side too, but on balance, there's a large group of Democrats serving in the legislature now in Oregon. I think it's very impressive. So, you know, all that's really left about the Republican Party here in Oregon is, you know, ideology. There's not really many ideas, and it hurts. And I don't think that the state is better off for it. I don't think the state wins by having a debate between the left wing and the very left wing of the Democratic Party. I don't think that's an intellectually interesting debate, and I don't think it's good for the state. And I know that Democrats like to say, you know, they love Republicans as long as they're defined as the way they want them in moderate terms and things like that. But I think there is a room for moderation in both parties. But there's not a lot of that going on now. I mean, the political process has become much more polarized, and that's stating the obvious. And it's driven by our campaign finance laws in this state, which I have a real problem with, not from an ethical corruption standpoint, but I think it makes for lazy candidates when 2/3 of your money comes from, you know, a dozen donors or less when you're running for the legislature. I don't think that breeds a good quality of a candidate. It also doesn't breed a candidate that learns the moderate approach to governing. So the Republican Party here has a long climb back. It may never climb back just because of the national change that's occurred. And Senator Obama will be there. You know, realignment always gets discussed after every election. I think you need to wait for that, wait 4 years at least to have another election. But if he governs as he spoke and as he campaigned, he governed liberal, but sort of center liberal, center left, he could be very, very successful.
Tim?
Well, thank you. I would generally associate myself with the comments that the two previous speakers have made, though I would be remiss if I didn't note that within a week or so after I had started out at Fox, we were getting emails on our website asking why in the world Fox had hired a liberal Democrat. Perspective is everything. Just a couple of points on the national race, and then I'd like to focus a bit on Oregon. First is that we're still counting votes. It looks like, I think, when everything is counted, the Obama margin is going to be about 9 million votes. It's about 8 million now. There are a lot of votes, over 2 million votes yet to be counted alone in California, which went by a crushing majority. We're still counting votes here in Oregon, which makes me wonder, why is it that hillbillies in Kentucky can get their full 100% count in 6 hours and it takes us 2 weeks? Vote by mail is a great thing. But seriously, the polls were correct. The average numbers of the polls said that Obama would win by about 7%. I think it's going to be very, very close to that margin. There were suggestions that the polls were wrong. There was a Bradley. There was a reverse Bradley. There was a theory that, well, Republicans didn't want to talk to pollsters this year, so there was a hidden Republican vote that wasn't coming out in the polls. That all proved to be baloney. They were pretty accurate here, not just ours, but others as well, but also pretty accurate across the country. So I would agree with everything I heard the two previous speakers say, and I would point out that Karl Rove did say he was going to create a realignment. He just didn't say for which party. And I will also say that I think, look, Karl Rove is a very smart guy. He's got a column in the Wall Street Journal, so he must be a smart guy. But I would also say that I think he's probably been the biggest long-term catastrophe for the Republican Party since Richard Nixon. Now we go on to Oregon, which was also very interesting. And you know, some of you here, do any of you here, it's hard to believe that a mere 2 years and change ago, do any of you remember an exciting front page article in the Willamette Week saying that the Republicans were about to take over the state of Oregon? I see some heads nodding. I got news for Willamette Week, no Pulitzer for that one. I actually wrote a rebuttal piece in Brainstorm magazine. It was kind of odd to rebut a theory of a conservative takeover in a conservative magazine, basically saying that it was baloney and trying to lay out why that was the case. Fundamentally, what both of the previous two gentlemen talked about in the state of Oregon and the problems here are exactly right. The move to the right by the Republican Party on a national basis, and in essence, as he noted, Dan noted in many respects, moving from corporate boardrooms to church pews, has not been very helpful in the state of Oregon. Grange halls, we're in corporate boardrooms.
They're still in the corporate board.
Just to throw out a couple of,
Democrats.
I like statistics, so I'm going to throw out a couple. In the last 27 partisan elections, statewide elections in Oregon, Senate, President, Governor, and all of our partisan statewide races, the numbers are 24 wins for the Democrats, 3 for the Republicans, of which Senator Smith had 2 of those 3 wins in 1996 and the year 2000. I don't know about you, but I think 3 and 24 would get you fired in the NBA. As a coach. In the state of Washington, by the way, which has gone through a very, very similar transition, despite the rivalry between the Ducks and the Huskies, the reality is the two states are culturally very similar, and they're going to vote within a point of each other in the presidential race. But in the state of Washington, the Republicans have lost 31 of the last 39 partisan statewide races. They actually did win 2 races, interestingly enough, with very moderate Republicans on Tuesday. So they were incumbents who held their offices. A couple of the things that, again, really struck me in the state were Barack Obama is going to carry Multnomah County by 200,000 votes. That's a phenomenal number. John Kerry won Multnomah County by just over 150,000 votes while on his way to winning the state by 77,000. So that means Kerry lost the rest of Oregon by 75,000 votes. But here's the fascinating thing about this year's election. Barack Obama is going to carry Oregon outside of Multnomah County by about 100,000 votes. That's a pretty dramatic shift. Barack Obama won Marion County. Barack Obama won Clackamas County. Barack Obama won over 60% of the vote in Washington County, which used to be, at least when I was growing up, way back in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 40s. Used 30s. That used to be one of the most reliably Republican counties in the state. Barack Obama fought to a dead-even draw in Jackson and Deschutes County, and by dead-even I mean the two in both those counties. The two are within 100 or 200 votes of each other. So that's pretty phenomenal. I agree with everything that was said about Obama. Before we talk about a realignment, let's see how he and the Democrats govern. And I do think this year, by the way, that the argument that the Republicans tried late, which was let's keep some Republicans in there, let's have to keep a balance on the Democrats, I actually didn't think worked this year because I think voters were basically saying, we've had it with the Republicans, we're going to turn it over to you Democrats. If you don't do a good job, we'll see you at the polls in 2 or 4 years. So before we talk realignment, let's see how, again, the Democrats govern. I do believe if they govern successfully, they do have a chance to create a semi-permanent governing majority. There is no permanent majority in American politics. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Despite no matter how well Obama does, at some point up the line we'll have a party switch. But it's also possible these two parties are going to change and mutate in ways that we're not exactly clear about. One other point as I was reading before I came over here is that the conservative Republicans are having a conclave this weekend, and they've decided what their problem was, that they were just insufficiently conservative. On top of that, they've now decided they basically want to run the moderates out of the party. I mean, that's exactly what they're saying, which is absolutely astonishing to me. And again, I would challenge any of you to tell me, can any of you think of the last time a hard-right conservative won a race in the state of Oregon? In a statewide race? The answer is you have to go back over 50 years, and the state's changed a little bit since then. So I know that folks have a lot of interesting questions, and let's just roll on with those.
Thanks very much. I'm going to quickly see if we can go through one round here so that we can get to the audience questions. What I'd like to do now is have a quick little memo to the legislative leadership and the governor down in Salem. I'd like Mark to quickly write an imaginary memo to the governor and the Democratic majority on how they should handle themselves in this new grand blue majority. Dan, I don't think you're speaking entirely to the dead, but let's see if you can give a little memo to the Republican leadership down there. And then, Tim, if you have any thoughts on what these two gentlemen come up with. Mark?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say I cannot support strongly enough the conservative Republicans' belief that more ideological purity is their way to paradise. Good on you. I I would make the I would make the opposite caution to the Democrats in the legislature and in the governor's office. I think it's very interesting. One of the things that was talked about in the Senate race by Senator-elect Merkley was that he had the most successful legislative session since, I believe, fish sprouted legs or something. And it was a very successful legislative session. It also reflected a lot of pent-up demand, good ideas that have been sort of bottled up when there was, Republican control in the House or there was split government. So some good things were done, but now the hard work begins. And we have issues in this state that, run up and down: education, how we pay for it, what we're paying for, our piece of global warming, tax, the perennial, how we raise money to do public purposes. And these are the kind of changes that have to be done smartly, deliberately, with a lot of inclusion of voters or citizens. It's great to have, we're on the cusp of a supermajority. I think they're going to be right at 36, although that includes Mike Schaffler, so who knows what's going to get through there. That's an inside joke for the legislative types.
Not off the record, though.
Not off the, it's okay. After Election Day, I'm done, So there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for making some very big changes, but when you make big changes, you're going to make them thoughtfully, and you need to make them, you need to do them, I don't want to say incrementally, but carefully. We have the opportunity on the state level, just as we have the opportunity on the national level, to make some real systemic change, but doing it right and doing it in a way that brings people along, as opposed to letting them know that you're smarter than them, makes the difference about whether these changes will stick. And so my advice would be, work it really hard, work it inside the building, but work it outside the building too, and bring Oregonians into the conversation about the changes we need to make for our future.
All right. Dan?
Well, the difference between the successful administration of President Reagan and the unsuccessful presidency of George W. Bush, to Mark's point, is Ronald Reagan always understood the need to keep the public with him on whatever he was going to pursue. And President Bush made major miscalculations, regardless of what you think of his policies, in not adjusting them to conform with the reality, to keep the public with him. And that's not exclusively a function of being able to give a great speech. You actually have to, model and change the makeup of the cake a little bit. You can't just put different frosting on it. So that's very important. My memo to the Republicans in the legislature, and this is a political consultant's memo, not a citizen's memo, is that it's the Democrats' job to govern. Your job is to retake the majority and let them govern. Obstruct where you need to obstruct, stand on your principles, but you're not. Don't delude yourself into believing that you're governing with a distinct minority in the legislature, because you're not. That doesn't mean individual legislators shouldn't be productive in their committees and all that kind of stuff, but at a macro level, it's the Democrats' job now to produce. They've got 100% control of the government with overwhelming majorities. Give them their shot, and pick a few fights that go to the strength of the Republican brand and the things that people like about Republicans: fiscal conservatism, support for small business, support for natural resource communities, those things. Don't pick fights on children's health care and these other things that unite the other team and divide your team. I mean, that's fundamentally what politics is about, is uniting your team and then dividing the other team to create a debate. And then you pick off, which is what Senator Obama was able very successfully to do. It's what Ronald Reagan very effectively did in reverse. And so, but it's, down at the legislature, and I spent a lot of time down there. When I started, there were 11 Republicans in the state Senate, and however, and so 19 Democrats. They didn't really need the Republicans for a quorum. So my advice to my bosses down there was, don't pretend to govern, let them do their job, and we'll provide an opposite point of view on key issues that unite our team and divide their team.
Well, thanks. I do want to revisit one of my previous comments. I don't want anyone to think that I was slamming the great state of Kentucky by calling them hillbillies, because I actually grew up in southern Ohio, was proud to consider myself a hillbilly, and it's indeed not an overstatement to say that I could see Kentucky from my house. The most important thing I would like to say...
This guy is rolling.
The most important thing I'd want to say is that I really agree with what both of these gentlemen previously said, but I would add one thing to that, and that is that in both Oregon and nationally, most of the seats that the Democrats won in Congress or in the Oregon State Legislature are in districts that are not deeply blue. What that means is if you want to maintain that majority, if you move too far to the left, you will put those folks in jeopardy. In the same way that the Republican Party, by moving too far to the right culturally on some other issues, destroyed their party in Oregon, destroyed it in Washington, has nearly destroyed it in California, and destroyed it in New England. There are no elected Republicans I believe, in the House of Representatives left in New England at all. There are still 2 senators in Maine, but they are very liberal, moderate senators, and indeed, Susan Collins, who is by any stretch a moderate, arguably the right wing of the Republican Party would call her a flaming liberal. She's very much a moderate, was reelected by a very comfortable majority in her state, despite the fact that Barack Obama pulled almost 60% of the vote in the state of Maine. So the most important thing that I would say is, as Democrats in both Oregon and nationally look at their majorities and look at how to govern, they need to understand if they want to stay in the majority and keep those folks in those purple districts, so to speak, they've got to make sure that they don't pursue policies that basically drive voters away from them.
I just add one thing. I mean, if you look at Washington County, how Senator Obama did, Senator Smith over the years, I'll little secret out, when Tim projected the race, I agreed with it. I didn't say that out loud in our room, but I was looking at the numbers in Washington County. And if you look at the legislative delegation now from Washington County that Tim referenced earlier, when I was working down in the legislature in the early 90s, I was fortunate enough to have some bosses who supported my efforts to pick candidates in primaries. And one of those was Senator Smith that supported me in doing that, to pick candidates that were moderate enough to win in those primaries, even if it meant stepping on the toes of ideological supporters or funders within our party. You know, the funny thing is, the agenda of the interest groups in your party is not always in the electoral best interest of the party. And both parties have seen that, the excesses. And that's the job of the elected officials, is to not get so bought into the labor or trial lawyers or whatever on the left, or the business groups or pro-life groups on the right, that they get to dictate who wins primaries. Okay. And that takes a lot of political stamina to stand up to those interests in your own party, and I hope Senator Obama does it.
Okay, Dan? Thanks very much. We're going to have to move on to the next stage of the program, and I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you. We are going to move to the question and answer session, but I was remiss in, I think, not making one introduction. I don't want to slight any other members of Congress that may be in the room, but we have the congressman from the city of Portland in the room, Earl Blumenauer. He's with us. I'm a little surprised. I don't know about these things. I'm a little surprised he's not in Chicago, but Congressman, welcome. Thank you. He managed to sneak through one more time. He's getting reelected. As always, the first question of our panel will be from our Board of Governors host. Today, our Board of Governors host is at the front of the line, Marge Kafoury. Marge Kafoury directed the Portland Office of Government Relations for 19 years, where she implemented the city's federal and state lobbying objectives. As a member of our Friday Forum Committee, as well as our Board of Governors, Marge first joined City Club, Marge, it says 1980, so you must have been 1.
Thank you very much.
So Marge, have the first question.
Thank you, Jim. Dan, you raised this issue, and I would like to elaborate on what I consider to be the Bill Sizemore initiative factory. Every 2 years, voters are confronted with essentially the same measures that they have defeated over and over again. This is very lucrative for Mr. Sizemore, but it's very costly for people who have to fight those measures. I would like to know your thoughts, everybody, about how Oregon can get off this merry-go-round.
It may sound stupid, but the people who fund him just have to stop funding him. You'd think, you know, losing, you wouldn't just keep pushing money. I don't know what sort of, you know, photos Bill Sizemore has of the people who donate to his campaigns, but I mean, I can't, honestly, if you're in our line of work, I cannot understand how people would keep giving money to someone that's providing you a product that comes up loser, loser, loser every single time. And so I'm not a big believer. I don't think that the answer here, frankly, is that we choke it off and make it more difficult and put up all these barriers to, I mean, we're not, listen, I don't think it hurts us to have these big arguments about these issues. I don't think democracy suffers, and I don't think all that is a bad thing. In fact, I actually think it's helping dramatically the fortunes of liberal interest groups and Democrats in this state for these measures to keep being put on the ballot, because it is permanently organized, permanently energized, and created a permanent campaign structure against them. And so, you know, I think it's a free enterprise situation, and until the people who fund them don't want to fund them, I think you're going to see them.
Well, it is, you may consider it fortunate, but it is costing a fortune. And I think that one of the things that Sizemore and his team, to the extent that you can call it a team, look at it and say, well, you know, maybe they won't win, but we're going to keep our, you know, we're going to keep our opponents, you know, back on their heels, or spending money trying to stop bad things instead of doing whatever their agenda is. But Dan is exactly right. I mean, you know, how do you keep giving this guy money? Well, right now his money is coming from Lauren Parks, and I don't think you can have pictures of Lauren Parks that would embarrass him, given the fact that he has an online sex therapy practice, which if you've ever seen those videos, it's, oh my God.
I've watched those videos.
Oh yes, late at night. But so Lauren Parks, I think, is going to give money just because he's a crazy old coot, and it apparently provides him enjoyment. But Dick Wendt is giving him money too. Dick Wendt is associated with one of the bigger businesses in this state, Geldwen, who are trying to run out a brand so that when you go to Home Depot, you buy a Geldwen window. And yet he is also permitting Bill Sizemore to continue what is, let's be clear here, a money-making enterprise for Bill Sizemore. This is a guy who has, you know, I mean, not everybody can be a successful business person, but this is the first thing he's ever been able to make money at. And the question I have is, did Lauren Parks and Dick Wendt know what their money was going for? They were pushing money through a nonprofit organization that was enabling Sizemore to buy a condo in Mexico and cars, and he's living in this really big house in Klamath Falls, basically on vapor. So the fact that he is continuing to get funded is stunning. The damage that it does, if for no other reason, that the money it sucks up, and you know, albeit much of this money is spent with people like me, so
exactly.
I am cutting my throat a little here.
How many campaigns did you run against the measure?
All of them. No, not really, not at all. But that's. You know, if people keep giving him money, he's going to keep doing it. He's the happy warrior. He's making a fortune. He doesn't care if they pass or not, and it's disfiguring. It's disfiguring our political conversation. So somebody, please make it stop.
But I'm not sure the public cares which interest group has to pay to stop Bill Sizemore.
No, they don't care. That's how he gets to keep going.
But I would really caution people against choking off the initiative system. It's a great and unique thing that we have, and you know, having big arguments doesn't hurt anybody.
I would say that, but I think while we don't want to choke off the initiative system, there's clearly some reforms, and Steve Novick is here. He'll rattle them off for you if you want to hear them later. That would make the initiative system less misleading, less subject to manipulation, to literally racketeering, which is what Sizemore was found to engage in. So I think, yeah, don't mend it, don't end it.
Tim, did you want to comment? Okay. All right. We'll now turn to other questions from the floor. Please remember that asking a question at Friday Forums is a privilege of City Club membership. Please identify yourself by name and as a City Club member. Try to hold your question to 30 seconds or less. And I guess I'd ask you to address your question to any one or any combination of the panelists. And Jeff, probably take questions too if someone wanted to pose one. Okay, go ahead, please.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. Wasteful overconsumption by borrowing. We met the problem, and it's us. A crucial question for you and all of us. Will the American people and Oregonians make the necessary sacrifices for the common good?
The common good. Tim?
Adam?
Congressman?
Yeah.
No, you gotta ask the pollster. He's the only one who actually talks
Well,
to
this
people.
is a little bit outside the purview of data, but I do believe that the next president is going to have to ask. We got a boatload of problems in this country. I mean, some of you here may have lived through the Great Depression and the Second World War. I'm sure those were difficult times, but a lot of chickens have come home to roost regarding we're totally a debtor nation. We're overcommitted around the world militarily. We got a lot of problems in that respect, and I think that Obama is going to have to at some point lay out that there are going to be some problems here, and we're all going to have to sacrifice. I don't know exactly what he's going to say, but I think the current administration, part of it was characterized by basically an unwillingness to tell that to folks, and I don't think it's going to be terribly popular. But I think if he can frame it in the same way that an FDR did or that a Ronald Reagan did, of saying, look, there can be a better tomorrow, but we're going to have some tough days today, then I think there's a chance that he'll get people to listen to him, because I think his election and his skills in terms of communicating give him the opportunity to do that.
I think political leadership is about finding the balance from an executive standpoint between therapy and discipline. And it's a sweet spot, because you can be kind of an eat your peas president like Jimmy Carter and make everybody feel, down in the dumps, and that it's the country's fault, and that it's ungovernable, that the problems are too big for us to overcome. So I think it's finding that sweet spot between a little bit of therapy, a little bit of discipline. President Bush had a huge opportunity to rally the country behind him and together after 9/11 to focus on a variety of things, probably particularly energy, and failed to do so. And I think the consensus in the country for change, sacrifice, particularly on the energy front after 9/11 was a huge missed opportunity.
And I would say, it's really the great question of, whether the country will be able to sacrifice. I mean, as I said when we were opening, I didn't say it explicitly, but we're sort of at a teachable moment here. And what it requires is leadership that is being willing to be honest without being, crabbed in its outlook. I remember when Walter Mondale had this great moment of, clarity in a debate, and he said, here's the difference between me and my opponent. We're both going to raise your taxes. I'm going to tell you the truth about it. I'll tell you the truth. But, that's really not the way to talk about it in terms of, I'm going to raise your taxes. Well, why? What am I going to get for it? What is the purpose to this shared sacrifice that we're going to talk about? Now, we have been in a situation where one side may want to talk about sacrifice, but they know they'll be punished politically for doing it because, things are going pretty well. What do I got to sacrifice? I got a car, I got a vacation. Well, now you have the opportunity to say, this is what that gets you. There is no free lunch. We have these problems. Let's have a grown-up conversation here about what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. So I think we have that opportunity now. If it is handled right, I think we can find that the American people are going to be willing to tighten their belts or put their shoulder to the wheel, whatever metaphor, trite metaphor you would like to use. But there is that opportunity, and hopefully it won't be squandered.
Chris Smith, City Club member. I was at this microphone a few weeks ago helping persuade my fellow City Club members that while both Measure 57 and Measure 61 were bad policy, good politics was to vote for 57 and make sure that the lesser of the two evils passed. So I was pleased but surprised that 61 actually did not get a majority. My question is, was there a way to avoid both of these, or did 61 only go down because 57 went up?
I want to start. Absolutely not. And I say this as somebody who was in charge of much of the voter communication for both 57 and 61. I want everyone, because I know that the voting for 57 was sort of an, ooh, do I have to? Without 57 on the ballot, 61 would have passed. I tell you that as I could tell you that the sun will come up in the morning. So, and anybody who voted for 57 and is now having buyer's regret, trust me. You can come up to me afterwards and ask me why, but without 57 providing a more rational alternative to 61, 61 would have passed, and not by a little bit.
Edward Hershey, City Club member. I did a fair share of phoning in this election cycle, and it may not surprise you to hear how many voters spontaneously lamented the stridency and distortion of the negative advertising. Is this something that's here to stay?
Asked Thomas Jefferson.
I don't think I quite heard
The question, I'll repeat the question. Voters were very upset about all the negative advertising. Is that something that's here to stay? And it's been here. Jefferson would say, oh, it's been here a while, but I'll leave it to others.
You couldn't have said it any better than I would. So.
Yes, it's here to stay, and people complain about it, but it works. And it works, by the way, because elections are a choice. Now, the tone is nasty, and really bad, nasty, irrelevant negative advertising doesn't work that well. But negative advertising that exposes a true difference between candidates in maybe fairly sharp terms is, I think, just fine. Politics is about a choice, and if my opponent is for some really bad things or has done some really bad things that are relevant to public service, he's not, or he or she will not be talking about it, and it's my responsibility to. Yeah. So there's always stuff about tone you could argue about, but it's here to stay and probably needs to be.
I changed my mind. I do want to say something. And that is simply that if you look at the contrast between the two presidential races, look, and I agree with Mark, negative contrast is not bad. I don't have a problem with, and I think if you look at the two presidential campaigns in particular, basically the McCain campaign attempted to scare voters about the Obama campaign. The Obama campaign said this guy's voted with George Bush 90% of the time and supported a war, which we didn't really need to get into. And I think those were effective messages and entirely within a broad context of what's fair politics. I think much of what the McCain campaign did was, in my mind, not, which was basically to imply that this guy's, well, we don't need to, I don't need to elaborate on it. I think
but I do want to say, I mean, if you want to see the desperation of sort of the McCain campaign, they resorted, honest to goodness, really, to red baiting. I mean, did anybody in this room think that in 2008 we were going to get a campaign about somebody's a communist? So there's negative campaigning that's just so beyond the pale. It's like, oh, you've got to be kidding me, and that doesn't work very well.
One last question.
Steve Novick, City Club member, and first I'd like to thank Mark for assuaging my guilt because I shared Chris Smith's 57-61 guilt. My question is, were you guys surprised that in a recession, people were willing to vote for money measures like the PCC bond or the Salem school bond, or is that just a freakish occurrence attributable to the genius of Liz Kaufman, who ran both campaigns?
Well, I think the world of Liz. I love Liz, and it is a testament to her skill. I have to say, I kind of was surprised, but that all the measures passed. I live in Washington County, and I think we passed along with everybody else, the zoo piece, the community college piece. We had a public safety levy, and maybe one other.
Don't forget about my parks bond.
And the park, yeah, that was it. And so I was quite impressed and surprised that. In a time of real economic anxiety, people were willing to invest that. So it surprised me, yeah.
I would like to say, as somebody who was involved in most of these campaigns, and Liz, who I work a lot with, we worked together on the Salem one and the PCC one, and I worked on the Parks one, and a couple of others. She asked me specifically to say this. one of the things you have to do, even in tough times, is have a conversation not about, am I going to raise your taxes? It's, what do we want our community to look like? What are the products or services we want to buy? Because they're important to us. And if they are, let's have a conversation about how to pay for them. How you enter this conversation is critically important. So I think it was heartening. I mean, we were all nervous. We didn't have any polling after the financial crash and some of these money measures, and we're all sitting there going, and let me add the children's levy, which Dan Saltzman led and I also helped with, which passed by 70-30. Because we had a conversation about what's important to our community. And we, in both the PCC bond and the children's levy especially, you know, in the children's levy, we had this last mail piece that had some kids on it. It says, tough times are toughest on them, which is true. But you have to have the conversation that makes it relevant to their values and what they need at the particular time. So I think it might have been a little surprising, but I wasn't shocked. I am heartened by it, and I hope that is the way we're going to have a larger conversation about what we do in the public sector in this state, how we pay for it, an honest conversation that's rooted in what our values are and what we want to see in our community, as opposed to demagoguing whether it's a tax increase or not.
We need to stop there as our time is up. As an example of one of the very significant problems we have in our society, it's diabetes. We're going to be talking about that next week here. Please come and participate. As we break, I want to thank our panel. I want to specifically point out that Liz Kaufman was to be with us today. We found out yesterday. I don't know when Mark found out, but he stepped in. We particularly appreciate that. Appreciate Mark, Dan Lavey, Tim Hibbitts, and Jeff Mapes. As we break, thank them all very much. We're adjourned.